What if humanity's greatest weakness was actually its ultimate weapon? When the Kytheran Empire demanded Earth's surrender, they expected fear and submission. Instead, they got calm defiance and a strategy they never saw coming. This isn't about brute force, it's about how 12 primitive ships turned galactic arrogance into utter humiliation in one stunning move. Stick around too, while the Kytheran Empire expanded across star systems for 3 centuries. They never detected the silent observers watching from the darkness between worlds. Humanity had established hidden monitoring stations in rogue planets and asteroid belts, collecting data on every conquest, every battle tactic, every political maneuver. These observation posts used advanced stealth technology that rendered them invisible to Kytheran sensors, operating on principles the Empire had never encountered. The Empire followed predictable patterns in their expansion. They always demanded surrender with identical terms, always approached new systems in the same formation, and always targeted cultural centers first. Human analysts tracked 17 separate invasion campaigns, creating psychological profiles of every senior Kytheran commander. They knew Admiral Vex Noller preferred dramatic approaches, that General Thorin valued speed over caution, and that the Empire's military doctrine never accounted for opponents who didn't follow established rules of engagement. This intelligence gathering created what military theorists call the underestimation advantage. By deliberately maintaining a primitive appearance and limiting technological emissions, humanity ensured the Kytherans would dismiss them as insignificant. Studies of conflict psychology show that overwhelming powers consistently underestimate opponents who appear weaker, leading to catastrophic miscalculations. The Kytherans' own arrogance became their vulnerability. They were so accustomed to immediate surrender that they never developed contingency plans for resistance. Human strategists mapped the Empire's entire command structure, identifying critical supply routes and communication networks. They knew which systems were most vital to Kytheran operations, and which governors were least loyal to the central authority. Every piece of information fed into complex simulation models that predicted the Empire's actions with astonishing accuracy. When the Kytheran fleet finally entered the solar system, human leaders already knew the exact terms of surrender they would demand, the time frame they would allow for compliance, and even the specific language they would use. Earth's response had been prepared for years, rehearsed through countless scenarios. The apparent technological gap between the species was not a measure of capability but a deliberate choice. Humanity had focused on asymmetric advantages rather than matching the Empire ship for ship. This careful preparation meant that when the Kytheran flagship approached Earth, its crew expected fear and submission. They anticipated the traditional ceremony of surrender that had played out across hundreds of worlds. What they encountered was calm readiness and a depth of understanding that should have been impossible for a species making first contact. The stage was set for a confrontation where one side knew everything about their opponent while the other understood nothing about them. The Empire's arrogance blinded them to the possibility that their predictable patterns had been decoded, that their technological superiority might be offset by strategic depth, and that their ceremonial approach to conquest was about to meet something entirely unexpected. We'll see how humanity rewrote the rules of space warfare. The Kytheran fleet approached Earth in what they called the submission formation, a perfect spherical arrangement with their flagship at the center, flanked by warships in ceremonial patterns that served no tactical purpose. Their ships gleamed with polished surfaces and decorative energy emissions, creating visible light displays across the solar system. This wasn't a military approach. It was a performance designed to overwhelm through spectacle rather than firepower. Every aspect of their arrival followed centuries of established protocol for incorporating new worlds into their empire. They had prepared specific surrender documents detailing Earth's new status as a tributary world. The terms included immediate disarmament of all spacefaring vessels, transfer of planetary resources to Kytheran control, and installation of imperial governors in every major population center. Cultural practices would be restricted to Kytheran-approved activities, and human leaders would undergo re-education programs to ensure proper loyalty to the Empire. These were the exact same terms they had imposed on 47 previous civilizations, with only the planet name changed in the documents. Historical analysis of dominant powers shows they consistently develop rituals of submission to reinforce their authority. The theatrical display serves psychological purposes. It humiliates the conquered while inflating the conqueror's sense of superiority. For the Kitharans, this ceremony had become so routine that they no longer considered the possibility of refusal. Their entire military doctrine assumed that overwhelming visual demonstrations would trigger psychological capitulation before any actual combat occurred. They had turned first contact into a standardized process that never accounted for deviation. The fleet's commanders expected to see panic across human communication channels. They anticipated desperate attempts at negotiation or signs of civil disorder as Earth's population reacted to their arrival. Their sensors were calibrated to detect the biological signs of fear in human leadership. Increased heart rates, stress hormones, and neural patterns associated with crisis response. Every previous species had shown these markers upon seeing the submission formation, which the Kitharans interpreted as validation of their methods. What they encountered instead was complete silence from Earth's defense networks. No emergency broadcasts, no panic transmissions between cities, no signs of military mobilization. Human orbital platforms continued their normal operations without deviation. The lack of reaction was more disconcerting to the Kitharan command staff than any defensive posture would have been. Their entire psychological playbook depended on predictable fear responses, and humanity's calm neutrality defied all their expectations. This marked the first time in recorded history that a species didn't immediately capitulate or attempt futile resistance. The Kitharan officers found themselves without prepared protocols for this scenario. Their training had covered surrender ceremonies and combat engagements, but never this quiet dung-die, this patient observation from the intended subjects of their conquest. The very normalcy of human activity following their dramatic arrival created cognitive dissonance among the invasion force. When the Kitharans finally opened communications, they transmitted their surrender terms with rehearsed grandeur, expecting to see human representatives appearing nervous or overwhelmed by the moment. Instead, they faced Director Vasquez, who showed the calm demeanor of someone receiving a routine business call. Her composure seemed to suggest that humanity had been expecting this communication and had already prepared their response. Admiral Vex Noller expected to see fear when the visual link established. His command center displayed biosensor readings from the human reception room, calibrated to detect stress indicators across 17 different physiological parameters. For 3 decades of conquest missions, he had watched alien leaders sweat, tremble, or even collapse when facing his transmission. The Kitharan Psychological Warfare Division had perfected intimidation protocols that leveraged biological responses to perceived threats. They knew exactly how sentient beings reacted to overwhelming force. Director Vasquez appeared on screen with the calm demeanor of someone reviewing routine paperwork. Her heart rate remained steady at 68 beats per minute. Her respiratory pattern showed no signs of stress-induced changes. Even her pupil dilation indicated focused attention rather than fear response. She offered a slight nod of acknowledgement rather than the expected bow or gesture of submission. This composure disrupted the entire psychological framework the Kitharans had built around first contact. Scenario studies of negotiation dynamics show that unexpected emotional responses create cognitive dissonance in prepared opponents. When one party maintains calm against anticipated fear, it signals either hidden capabilities or superior understanding of the situation. The Kitharan command staff found themselves questioning their own assessments rather than doubting humanity's response. Admiral Noller actually ordered a systems check on his biological sensors, convinced they must be malfunctioning. His officers began whispering concerns about whether they had misjudged this species entirely. The strategic value of emotional control in high-stakes situations cannot be overstated. Military historians note that composure under pressure often correlates with prepared responses and tactical advantages. Vasquez's calm suggested that humanity had anticipated this moment and developed countermeasures. It implied they possessed either technological parity or strategic depth that made the Kitharan threat manageable. This single display of emotional control forced the entire invasion force to reconsider their assumptions about Earth's capabilities. When Vasquez finally spoke, her voice carried no tension or hesitation. She delivered the rejection with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating obvious facts. The phrase "we reject your terms" contained no emotional emphasis, no defensive justification, no attempt at negotiation. It was simply a statement of position. This minimalist response proved more devastating than any dramatic declaration could have been. The Kitharans had prepared for fear, anger, or desperate bargaining, not this quiet certainty. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy's most powerful military force encountered complete refusal without accompanying panic. The phrase echoed through the flagship's command center, leaving officers uncertain how to proceed. Their contingency plans covered military responses to resistance, but not psychological responses to calm rejection. Admiral Noller found himself without prepared protocols. His entire playbook rendered useless by humanity's composed defiance. This moment revealed the critical flaw in Kitharan military doctrine. They had trained their officers to recognize and exploit fear, but never to interpret confidence. The Admiral's uncertainty spread through the command structure, creating hesitation where there should have been certainty. This psychological victory cost humanity nothing but demonstrated their strategic advantage before any physical confrontation occurred. The Kitharans now faced a dilemma: proceed with invasion against an opponent who showed no fear of their capabilities, or reconsider their assessment of human technology. Their sensors still showed primitive ships and limited energy signatures, but the human response suggested hidden capabilities. This disconnect between technological appearance and psychological reality created the first cracks in their certainty about easy conquest. The Kitharan fleet commanders watched with amusement as 12 small human vessels moved to intercept positions. Their sensors showed ships 1/10 the size of standard Kitharan warships, with energy signatures suggesting primitive fusion reactors rather than proper singularity cores. The vessels lacked visible weapon emplacements and moved at speeds that seemed laughable compared to Imperial warship capabilities. Conventional military analysis would classify these craft as scout vessels or possibly civilian transports modified for emergency defense. Kitharan assessment protocols measured specific metrics to determine threat levels. They analyzed power output, shield strength, weapon energy signatures, mass displacement, and propulsion efficiency. Their systems compared these readings against known technological benchmarks across hundreds of conquered species. Every measurement suggested human technology lagged centuries behind Imperial standards. The assessment algorithms flagged the human vessels as negligible threats, below even the threshold for defensive monitoring. This justified the fleet commander's confidence in dismissing Earth's defensive capabilities. Military history shows standardized technological evaluation often fails against unconventional forces. Assessment systems designed to measure conventional power miss adaptive capabilities and creative applications of technology. The Kitharans measured raw energy output, but didn't account for efficiency of application. They calculated theoretical maximum weapon yields but ignored tactical innovation. Their sensors detected standard shield emissions but couldn't recognize entirely different defensive principles. The blind spots in their evaluation became apparent when they tried to categorize human technology using existing frameworks. The ships didn't fit known classifications. They showed aspects of multiple technological trees without conforming to any single development path. This created confusion in the assessment algorithms, which defaulted to low-threat classifications when encountering unclassifiable signatures. The system designers had never considered that a species might combine technologies in entirely new ways. What the Kitharans missed was humanity's approach to problem-solving. They measured hardware but ignored software capabilities. They assessed individual ship performance but didn't consider network effects. They evaluated visible technologies but overlooked integrated systems. Most importantly, they measured everything except creative adaptation, the human ability to use limited resources in unexpected ways. The assessment reports focused on quantitative deficiencies while missing qualitative advantages. They noted the small size but didn't consider that smaller targets are harder to hit. They recorded modest energy signatures but didn't account for precision targeting that required less power. They observed conventional materials but overlooked specialized alloys optimized for specific functions rather than general performance. This failure of assessment reflected the Kitharan Empire's cultural bias toward visible power and standardized development. Their entire technological paradigm valued obvious superiority rather than subtle efficiency. They understood overwhelming force but not surgical precision. They recognized technological advancement along predictable paths but not creative leaps that bypassed conventional development stages. The resolution became clear when the human vessels began maneuvering. The Ketherans had measured everything except the most important factor, the human capacity for innovation under constraints. They evaluated the tools but not the minds using them. They assessed the technology but not the strategy behind its application. This fundamental oversight would prove catastrophic within moments. As the Imperial commanders prepared to dispatch a single fighter squadron to eliminate what they considered a nuisance force, the human ships initiated maneuvers that defied all known physics. Their movements followed patterns that shouldn't have been possible with their observed propulsion systems. The Ketheran sensors suddenly registered energy signatures that contradicted previous readings. The assessment algorithms began generating conflicting threat evaluations as new data streams overwhelmed their classification systems. Laughter in the command center died as officers realized their technological assessment had been completely wrong. The human vessels weren't primitive. They were different in ways their systems couldn't comprehend. This moment of realization arrived too late, as the 12 ships began demonstrating capabilities that should have been impossible, according to Ketheran understanding of physics. The Ketheran Empire followed a predictable pattern across 3 centuries of expansion. Whenever they encountered a civilization developing advanced technology outside their controlled scientific paradigms, they eliminated that species and purged their knowledge from galactic records. Their military campaigns specifically targeted research facilities, data archives, and educational centers to ensure no technological alternatives could challenge their dominance. This systematic destruction created what historians would later call the Great Silencing, the eradication of countless scientific traditions and cultural achievements. Humanity discovered this pattern through long-range observation of Ketheran operations. Our deep space monitoring stations detected the energy signatures of planetary bombardments, followed by deliberate information scrubbing operations. We realized the Empire wasn't just conquering worlds, it was erasing entire intellectual histories. This understanding prompted a covert preservation initiative that would become humanity's most valuable strategic project. Operation Archive involved sending stealth probes to systems after Ketheran forces had departed. These missions recovered data fragments from damaged storage systems, intercepted residual communications, and collected physical artifacts from ruined worlds. The process resembled archaeological recovery combined with digital forensics. Teams worked to reconstruct complete knowledge systems from partial data, often spending years assembling fragments into usable information. The preserved knowledge came from civilizations that had developed along completely different technological paths. One species had mastered quantum entanglement communication without developing traditional radio systems. Another created biological computers that operated on neural network, principles far advanced beyond human AI. A third civilization had developed gravitic manipulation, technology that allowed precise control of space-time curvature. Each preserved knowledge system offered unique capabilities the Ketherans had eliminated. Cultural preservation creates strategic advantage because diverse knowledge systems generate innovative solutions. When humanity integrated these recovered technologies, we didn't just add new tools. We gained new ways of thinking about problems. The combination of different scientific approaches led to breakthroughs the original civilizations might never have discovered independently. This interdisciplinary integration became humanity's greatest asset. The methodology involved more than just data recovery. Teams of specialists worked to understand the cultural contexts that produced each technology. Linguists decoded alien languages to grasp nuanced scientific concepts. Anthropologists studied social structures to understand how different societies approached innovation. This cultural understanding proved essential for properly applying the recovered knowledge without causing unintended consequences. Human engineers developed integration frameworks that allowed technologies from different sources to work together. They created adaptive interfaces that translated between different scientific paradigms and built systems that could harness multiple energy sources simultaneously. This work required fundamentally rethinking how technologies interact across different developmental paths. The combined capabilities created something entirely new, a technological ecosystem that blended the greatest innovations from dozens of civilizations. Our ships used propulsion systems from one species, shield technology from another, and computing systems from a third. This combination produced capabilities that appeared impossible to species familiar. With only one technological tradition, Earth became the galaxy's living library, not through military conquest but through careful preservation and integration. We didn't develop superior technology so much as become the guardians and synthesizers of knowledge the Empire had tried to erase. This role gave us capabilities the Kitharans couldn't anticipate, because they came from sources the Empire believed destroyed. The resolution became clear during the engagement. Humanity's advantage came from curated excellence rather than native innovation. We offered the galaxy something the Empire never could: a synthesis of diverse knowledge systems working in harmony. This approach to technology would eventually reshape galactic civilization. The preservation effort required coordination across light years of space, which led to the development of communication systems that could operate instantaneously across vast distances. This capability would prove essential for the distributed response that followed. Conventional space warfare faces a fundamental limitation. The speed of light creates communication delays that make real-time coordination impossible across interstellar distances. A command sent from a central fleet position might take hours or days to reach distant units, creating strategic vulnerabilities that even advanced empires must accommodate through rigid battle plans and delegated authority. The Kitharan Empire operated with this constraint, using predetermined engagement protocols and local commanders who followed standardized procedures when cut off from central command. Humanity solved this problem using quantum entanglement communication technology recovered from the Zeta Reticuli civilization. This system creates paired particles that maintain connection across any distance, allowing instantaneous information transfer regardless of separation. Each human ship, monitoring station, and command center maintained entanglement links with the entire network, creating a web of real-time communication that bypassed light speed limitations entirely. Theoretical physics has long suggested that quantum entanglement could enable faster-than-light information exchange, though practical implementation remained elusive for most species. Human scientists combined multiple recovered technologies to create stable entanglement arrays that could transmit complex data streams without signal degradation. The system required precise calibration and sophisticated error correction, but once established, it allowed seamless coordination across thousands of light years. Instant coordination provides overwhelming strategic advantages in military operations. Commanders can adjust tactics in real time based on evolving situations. Units can execute complex maneuvers with perfect timing. Intelligence gathered in one sector immediately becomes available to all forces. This creates operational flexibility that traditional military structures cannot match. An opponent limited by light speed delays must fight with predetermined plans while facing an adversary that adapts instantaneously. The human network operated like a distributed nervous system rather than a centralized command structure. Each unit maintained autonomy while having access to complete situational awareness. Decisions could be made locally using global information, creating both flexibility and resilience. The system couldn't be disrupted by attacking command centers because the command function existed everywhere, simultaneously. This capability built anticipation for how humanity would utilize such coordination. The Kitharan Empire moved like a prehistoric creature, massive and powerful but slow to react, with signals taking time to travel through its nervous system. Humanity operated like a modern predator, agile, responsive, and capable of instantaneous coordinated action across its entire structure. This difference in operational tempo would prove decisive. The resolution became clear as human forces began their operation. While the Empire relied on hierarchical command chains that created delays and single points of failure, humanity's network enabled distributed execution with perfect synchronization. This approach transformed what might have been a conventional fleet engagement into something entirely different, a coordinated strike that appeared simultaneously across the Empire's vast territory. The transition to attack methodology developed naturally from this communication advantage. With instant coordination established, human forces could implement strategies that conventional militaries would consider impossible. They could strike multiple critical targets simultaneously without warning, creating confusion and overwhelming defensive capabilities. The Empire's distributed assets suddenly faced coordinated attacks that shouldn't have been possible given the distances involved. This communication network enabled the distributed response teams to operate with precision timing across vast distances, creating the appearance of a single assault happening everywhere at once. The Kytherin command structure, built around light-speed limited communications, couldn't comprehend or counter this capability. Their entire defensive doctrine assumed attackers would face the same coordination limitations they themselves experienced. The Kytherin military operated with a rigid command hierarchy that mirrored their entire imperial structure. Orders flowed from the Supreme Command down through fleet admirals, sector generals, and ship captains in an unbroken chain of authority. Each level required approval from above before taking significant action, creating delays and bottlenecks that grew worse across interstellar distances. Their entire war machine functioned like a massive bureaucracy, where initiative was discouraged and adherence to protocol valued above adaptability. This centralized structure worked against disorganized opponents, but contained critical vulnerabilities when facing unconventional tactics. Humanity developed a completely different approach using distributed autonomous teams. Each 12-person unit operated with full authority to make tactical decisions based on real-time intelligence from the quantum network. These teams trained for years in simulated scenarios, developing the judgment to execute complex operations without direct supervision. They shared a common strategic understanding rather than following specific orders, allowing coordinated action without centralized control. This structure resembled a neural network where each node contributes to overall intelligence. Small teams executed attacks that traditional militaries would consider impossible with such limited numbers. They used precision timing and specialized equipment to disable critical systems, often leveraging the element of surprise and intimate knowledge of Kytherin infrastructure. One team might neutralize a power distribution center, while another simultaneously disrupted communications at a shipyard, with both actions perfectly synchronized despite occurring light years apart. Their effectiveness came from preparation and coordination rather than brute force. Research on organizational structures shows network-based systems outperform hierarchies in complex dynamic environments. Hierarchies excel at executing planned operations but struggle with adaptation to unexpected situations. Networks allow rapid information sharing and decentralized decision-making that can respond to changing conditions. Military analysts note that distributed organizations often defeat larger centralized forces through superior flexibility and resilience. The Kytherin structure represented an outdated model that couldn't cope with modern network warfare. Distributed decision-making provides strategic advantages that centralized systems cannot match. Local commanders understand their immediate situation better than distant superiors. When equipped with complete information and clear objectives, they can make better decisions faster. This approach also creates redundancy. The loss of any single team or command node doesn't disable the entire operation. The system continues functioning even as parts fail or become isolated. The anticipation built toward how these distributed teams would execute their coordinated strikes. With instant communication and shared situational awareness, they could time their actions to create maximum impact across the Empire. The Kytherin command structure, designed for linear campaigns and set-piece battles, would face attacks that appeared coordinated, yet had no central coordination point. This would overwhelm their decision-making processes and create confusion at every level. The resolution became clear as the operation commenced. The Empire found itself fighting something resembling a hydra. When they focused on one threat, others emerged elsewhere. Their centralized command couldn't process the distributed nature of the attacks. Each team represented both an independent threat and part of a coordinated whole, creating tactical dilemmas that their rigid structure couldn't solve. Attempts to reinforce one sector left others vulnerable, while concentrating forces created gaps in their defensive coverage. This approach transitioned naturally into the attack execution phase. The distributed teams began their operations using the element of surprise and perfect coordination. They struck targets across hundreds of systems simultaneously, creating the appearance of a massive force appearing everywhere at once. The Kytherin military, trained to identify and engage centralized enemy formations, found itself unable to comprehend or counter this decentralized assault pattern. The Kytherin military command expected a traditional engagement. Their strategic planning always assumed a primary battlefield where enemy forces would concentrate for decisive combat. They prepared for fleet actions, planetary assaults, and system blockades, standard warfare scenarios that played to their numerical and technological advantages. Their entire command structure optimized for identifying and destroying centralized enemy formations, with contingency plans for multiple front operations, but always within conventional spatial boundaries. Their strategic displays suddenly illuminated with hundreds of simultaneous engagement markers across Imperial territory, warning signals activated in shipyards, mining operations, research facilities, and communication hubs, locations separated by light years, yet all reporting attacks at the same precise moment. The coordination system couldn't categorize this event pattern because it defied all previous combat data. Officers initially assumed sensor malfunctions or system errors rather than actual simultaneous attacks. The timing precision came from humanity's quantum entanglement network. Every distributed team received execute commands at the same absolute moment, creating attacks that appeared coordinated across impossible distances. This synchronization wasn't just hours or minutes apart. Actions occurred within microseconds of each other, despite the vast separations involved. The effect created psychological shock beyond the physical damage inflicted. Military psychology research shows simultaneous multi-front attacks overwhelm cognitive processing capabilities. The human brain evolved to handle threats sequentially, prioritizing dangers based on immediacy and severity. When multiple critical threats appear at once, decision-making systems become paralyzed by choice overload. Commanders facing dozens of simultaneous emergencies cannot allocate attention effectively, leading to delayed responses and poor prioritization. The Kytherin command staff experienced this cognitive overload as their crisis management systems flooded with priority alerts. Centralized command systems contain inherent vulnerabilities to distributed simultaneous attacks. Decision authority rests with limited personnel who must process information through formal channels. Communication delays create bottlenecks even with advanced technology. The Kytherin structure required situation assessments moving up the chain, while orders moved down, creating critical time lags. Each simultaneous attack forced decisions that normally would receive full attention now competing with dozens of other emergencies. The anticipation built toward understanding what specific targets humanity had chosen. The attack pattern suggested careful selection rather than random strikes. Each target represented a critical node in the Imperial infrastructure, places whose simultaneous disruption would create cascading failures across multiple systems. The coordination indicated deep intelligence about which assets mattered most to Kytherin operations. The resolution became devastatingly clear as damage reports accumulated. The Empire didn't lose a single battle or even a series of engagements. They lost ship production capabilities across 12 systems simultaneously. They lost communication relays connecting 20 sectors at the same moment. They lost resource processing facilities that supplied entire fleet groups in coordinated strikes. The attacks didn't just inflict damage, they dismantled the Empire's operational capacity in a single coordinated action. This approach transitioned naturally to the target selection strategy. The simultaneous strikes weren't random but surgically precise, hitting assets whose loss would maximize disruption while minimizing direct combat. The pattern revealed humanity understood the Empire's weaknesses better than its own commanders did, striking where it would hurt most rather than where defenses were strongest. Conventional military doctrine focuses on fleet engagements and direct combat. Armies trained to destroy enemy forces through superior firepower and tactics. The Kytherin Empire perfected this approach across centuries of conquest, developing massive warships and overwhelming offensive capabilities. Their entire strategic mindset valued visible military strength above all other considerations. They expected opponents to challenge their fleets directly, playing to the Empire's greatest advantages. Humanity bypassed this expectation entirely. Instead of targeting warships or military bases, our distributed teams struck support infrastructure. They hit shipyards producing new vessels, fuel depots supplying existing fleets, communication networks coordinating operations, and logistics systems moving supplies. These targets contained minimal defensive coverage because the Empire never anticipated attacks on non-military assets. The strategy avoided strength and targeted vulnerability. Specific targets revealed careful strategic planning. Teams disabled antimatter production facilities that powered Kytherin engines. They sabotaged navigation beacon networks that guided Imperial fleets through hyperspace routes. They destroyed data centers containing fleet deployment schedules and operational plans. Each target was chosen for its role in sustaining military operations rather than its combat value. The pattern showed deep understanding of how the Empire actually functioned. Military theory discusses the concept of centers of gravity, critical elements that sustain an opponent's capability to fight. Traditional thinking often identifies military formations as these centers. Humanity recognized that the Empire's true centers of gravity were its industrial capacity, resource networks, and command infrastructure. Attacking these elements neutralized military power without engaging in direct combat. This approach required less force but produced greater strategic effects. Attacking support systems creates cascading failures that disable military capability. A warship without fuel cannot move. A fleet without communications cannot coordinate. An army without supplies cannot sustain operations. The simultaneous strikes ensured these systems failed across the Empire at once, preventing reinforcement or recovery. Military forces remained intact, but became isolated and ineffective. Their weapons mattered little without the infrastructure to employ them effectively. The anticipation built toward understanding the Empire's sudden vulnerability. Their massive fleets sat idle without deployment orders. Their ground forces held positions without resupply. Their command structure issued instructions that never reached intended recipients. The military machine that had conquered hundreds of worlds became suddenly paralyzed. This approach demonstrated that true power lies in sustainability, rather than destructive capability. The resolution became clear as the operation progressed. Humanity didn't need to defeat the Kytherin fleet in battle because we made that fleet irrelevant. Ships without fuel cannot attack. Soldiers without communications cannot receive orders. Commanders without intelligence cannot make decisions. The Empire's military strength became a useless asset, like a powerful engine with no fuel line connecting it to energy sources. This surgical approach transitioned naturally to the leadership's reaction. The Kytherin High Command found themselves with intact military forces that couldn't be employed effectively. They possessed overwhelming destructive power, but no means to direct it against an opponent that refused conventional engagement. This forced a complete re-evaluation of their strategic situation and capabilities. Admiral Thoran reviewed the latest battle simulations with complete confidence in Kytherin military doctrine. His career spanned 40 years of successful campaigns using standardized engagement protocols that never failed against conventional opponents. The Empire's approach valued overwhelming force, centralized command, and technological superiority, principles that had subjugated hundreds of species across the galaxy. He believed any conflict followed predictable patterns that his training and experience could manage effectively. The moment of understanding arrived not with a dramatic explosion or fleet engagement, but with a logistics report. His display showed 17 simultaneous system alerts indicating critical resource shortages across the Empire. Fuel production had stopped at 6 major facilities. Ammunition manufacturing halted at 9 locations. Starship components ceased delivery from 12 distribution centers. The pattern indicated coordinated sabotage rather than random failures, but the scale and timing suggested something impossible. Cognitive dissonance occurs when reality contradicts deeply held beliefs. Military leaders facing unexpected defeat often experience this psychological phenomenon as their mental models conflict with observable facts. Admiral Thoran's training told him to look for a central command structure directing these attacks, but the distributed nature defied this expectation. His doctrine said to identify the main enemy force, but no concentrated force existed. Every assumption he relied on began failing simultaneously. The specific information that revealed the true situation came from damage assessment reports. Analysis showed the attacks used technologies from civilizations the Empire had destroyed centuries earlier. The sabotage methods matched techniques from the Zeta Reticuli, the quantum entanglement principles from the Cassiopeans, the molecular disassemblers from the Lyran Collective. This evidence suggested humanity hadn't developed these capabilities independently but had preserved and integrated knowledge The Empire thought erased. Paradigm shifts in military. Understanding often occurred during crises when existing models prove inadequate. The Admiral began recognizing that humanity's advantage came from sources beyond technological innovation. They operated on strategic principles the Empire had never encountered, because they systematically eliminated alternative approaches to warfare. This realization forced him to question not just this engagement, but 3 centuries of imperial military doctrine. The anticipation built toward admitting this wasn't a tactical defeat, but a conceptual failure. His forces weren't losing to superior weapons but to superior understanding. The Empire's strength became its weakness. Their standardized approach made them predictable. Their centralized structure made them vulnerable. Their destruction of alternatives left them unprepared for creative solutions. The resolution became clear as he reviewed the complete damage assessment. He didn't see military defeat in the traditional sense. He saw the complete failure of an entire worldview. The Empire's conquest model, their technological development path, their political structure, all contained fatal flaws that humanity had exploited simultaneously. This wasn't about losing a battle, but about discovering their entire civilization stood on fragile foundations. This moment of realization forced the admission that continued resistance would only increase casualties without changing the outcome. The Empire couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter humanity's approach, because it required rethinking everything they believed about power and conflict. This understanding created the necessary mindset for considering surrender not as defeat, but as inevitable acknowledgement of reality. The transition to surrender terms began with this conceptual shift. Admiral Thorin recognized that humanity's victory came from principles the Empire had systematically destroyed in others: cooperation, diversity of thought, and creative problem-solving. This admission made the subsequent negotiations not about military terms, but about fundamental restructuring of galactic relations. The Kithaeron Empire had arrived with terms demanding Earth's complete submission. Their surrender document required unilateral disarmament, resource extraction rights, political control, and cultural assimilation. It represented the standard imperial template used against hundreds of species: absolute domination with no negotiation or compromise. These terms assumed total victory and complete subjugation as the only possible outcomes of conflict. Humanity's response mirrored the Empire's format, but transformed its essence. Our terms included disarmament provisions, but applied equally to both sides. Resource management clauses ensured fair distribution rather than exploitation. Political restructuring created balanced representation instead of imposed governance. Cultural protections preserved diversity rather than enforcing conformity. Each element took the Empire's original demand and reconstructed it into a mutual agreement. The specific conditions revealed careful design for lasting stability. Kithaeron military forces would reduce to defensive levels matching human capabilities. Resource extraction would follow sustainable practices with oversight from both parties. Political power would shift to systems with checks and balances preventing any single species' dominance. Cultural exchange programs would replace assimilation policies. These terms didn't punish but restructured, creating equality where there had been hierarchy. Research in conflict resolution shows reciprocal treatment creates more durable settlements than imposed solutions. When both parties accept similar obligations, it reduces resentment and builds cooperative foundations. The psychological impact of receiving one's own demands reflected back as mutual requirements forces reassessment of original positions. This approach transforms conflict from zero-sum competition to collaborative problem-solving. The terms ensured structural change through verification systems and gradual implementation. Independent monitoring would prevent violations, with consequences applying equally to all parties. Transition periods allowed adjustment to new relationships without sudden disruption. The agreement contained built-in review processes for ongoing improvement, rather than static imposition. Anticipation built toward how these terms would reshape galactic politics. The Empire's conquered species would see the Kithaerons accepting the same restrictions they had imposed on others. This symbolic reversal would demonstrate that no species held inherent superiority. The psychological impact would ripple through every world that had known imperial domination. The resolution became clear as the Kithaeron leadership reviewed the terms. They faced the extraordinary situation of being offered the same fairness they had denied others. The conquered became arbiters of a peace that protected everyone equally. This transformation of roles signaled not just military defeat but philosophical revolution. Humanity's approach demonstrated that true victory comes from creating systems that benefit all participants. The terms established not just peace but a new framework for interstellar relations based on mutual respect rather than domination. This foundation would allow previously suppressed species to contribute their unique perspectives and capabilities. The transition to new political structures began with this fundamental rebalancing of power and responsibility. The agreement created mechanisms for continuous adaptation rather than fixed hierarchies, ensuring the galaxy wouldn't simply replace one empire with another. This approach recognized that sustainable peace requires ongoing effort and adjustment from all parties involved. Under Kytheran rule, subjugated species existed in complete isolation from each other. The Empire intentionally prevented communication between conquered worlds, fearing collective resistance. Each species lived in informational quarantine, unaware that others shared their suffering. This isolation extended beyond communication barriers to cultural separation. The Empire suppressed unique technologies, languages, and social structures to prevent the exchange of ideas that might challenge their control. The psychological impact created feelings of unique helplessness, as each civilization believed they alone faced this oppression. Humanity broke this isolation using the quantum communication network originally developed for military coordination. We established translation systems that could process thousands of languages simultaneously, and created cultural exchange platforms where species could share their histories and knowledge. The first connections revealed surprising commonalities in experiences under imperial rule. Similar suppression methods, identical resource extraction patterns, and parallel cultural destruction campaigns. This shared understanding created immediate bonds between previously isolated civilizations. Research on collective trauma shows that shared suffering creates powerful alliances when victims discover common experiences. Groups that previously saw themselves as separate entities begin identifying as part of a larger community with shared interests. This psychological shift transforms individual grievances into collective purpose. The liberated species found strength in recognizing that their struggles weren't isolated incidents but part of systematic oppression affecting many civilizations. The communication systems enabled more than just emotional connection. They allowed technical collaboration between species with complementary capabilities. One civilization provided advanced materials science, another contributed energy distribution systems, a third offered biological adaptation techniques. This cross-species cooperation created solutions no single civilization could have developed independently. The strategic value came from combining diverse perspectives to solve complex problems. Diverse perspectives in problem-solving yield innovative solutions because different evolutionary paths create unique approaches to challenges. A species from high-gravity worlds might develop structural engineering principles unknown to atmospheric flyers. Aquatic civilizations could offer insights into fluid dynamics that land-based species never considered. This variety of problem-solving methods became the coalition's greatest asset, allowing them to address issues from multiple angles simultaneously. The anticipation built toward how these diverse species would structure their new government. Traditional models based on single-species dominance had clearly failed. The coalition needed a system that valued all contributions while preventing any group from achieving disproportionate power. This required completely rethinking governance from first principles rather than modifying existing structures. The resolution became clear as representatives from dozens of species collaborated on the new galactic framework. The Empire's victims became the architects of its replacement precisely because they understood the failures of centralized power from personal experience. They designed systems with built-in protections against the abuses they had suffered, creating checks and balances that prevented any single species from dominating others. This collaborative approach naturally transitioned to how the coalition would handle reparations and reconstruction. The diverse perspectives ensured that recovery efforts addressed the needs of all affected species, rather than prioritizing certain groups. The very diversity that the Empire had tried to suppress became the foundation for building a more resilient galactic community. Victory over the Kytheran Empire created an immediate question. how to handle the defeated power. Conventional wisdom demanded punitive measures, disarmament, resource seizures, and restrictions that would prevent future aggression. Many liberated species expected harsh terms that would mirror the Empire's own treatment of conquered worlds. This retributive approach had historical precedent across galactic conflicts, where victors typically imposed conditions designed to weaken opponents permanently. Humanity proposed a different path focused on reconstruction rather than punishment. Instead of seizing Kytheran resources, we established fair trade systems that benefited all parties. Rather than dismantling their industrial capacity, we helped retool factories for peaceful production. The approach emphasized mutual benefit over unilateral advantage, creating systems where Kytheran recovery contributed to galactic stability rather than breeding resentment. Specific programs demonstrated this constructive philosophy. Joint research initiatives combined Kytheran technological knowledge with other species' innovations. Infrastructure projects repaired damage from the conflict while connecting Kytheran worlds to new trade networks. Educational exchanges allowed Kytheran scientists to contribute to galactic advancement while learning alternative perspectives. Each program served dual purposes, helping the Empire recover while integrating them into the new galactic community. Research on conflict resolution shows restorative justice produces more durable peace than retributive approaches. Punitive settlements often create resentment that leads to future conflicts, while constructive solutions build mutual interest in maintaining peace. Studies of post-conflict societies indicate that when all parties benefit from stability, they become invested in preserving it. This psychological principle guided humanity's approach to the peace settlement. The implementation prevented future conflict by addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Kytheran society had been shaped by resource scarcity and perceived threats, which drove their expansionist policies. The reconstruction programs provided alternative solutions to these problems through trade and cooperation. By making peace more beneficial than conflict, the settlement created natural incentives for maintaining positive relations. This approach also recognized that the Kytheran population consisted largely of people following policies they didn't create. The reconstruction efforts distinguished between leadership decisions and general population needs, ensuring ordinary citizens benefited from the new peace. This prevented the collective punishment that often fuels cycles of retaliation in post-war situations. The anticipation built toward long-term stability through mutual interdependence. As Kytheran worlds became economically and culturally connected to other species, the cost of conflict increased for everyone. Trade networks created shared prosperity, while cultural exchanges built understanding across previous divisions. These connections formed a web of relationships that made a return to isolationism impossible. The resolution became clear over time as the galaxy experienced unprecedented stability. They built a peace that lasted because it benefited everyone involved. Kytheran worlds prospered through new trade routes while previously oppressed species gained access to advanced technologies. This created a positive feedback loop where cooperation generated more benefits, reinforcing the desire to maintain peaceful relations. This foundation naturally supported the development of new galactic governance structures. The cooperative economic and cultural ties formed during Reconstruction provided the groundwork for political integration. Species that had been trading partners and research collaborators found it natural to extend their cooperation to shared governance, creating a system built on practical relationships rather than imposed structures. Centralized imperial control created massive inefficiencies that stifled progress across the galaxy. The Kytheran Empire required every decision to pass through multiple bureaucratic layers, causing delays that hampered effective governance. Their system prioritized control over efficiency, creating bottlenecks that prevented timely responses to local issues. This top-down approach also bred oppression, as distant administrators enforced policies without understanding regional needs or cultural contexts. The concentration of power in a single species meant diverse perspectives were systematically excluded from decision-making processes. Humanity's coalition established a cooperative sector-based governance system that balanced local autonomy with galactic coordination. Each sector maintained control over its internal affairs, while participating in collective decision-making for broader issues. The structure resembled a neural network, where local nodes process information independently while remaining connected to the whole. This approach allowed customized solutions for different regions while maintaining overall coherence. The system operated on autonomy within cooperation principles. Local governments could adapt policies to their specific environments while adhering to fundamental rights protections and trade agreements. Sector councils made decisions about resource management, cultural preservation, and infrastructure development without requiring central approval. A galactic council handled only those matters affecting multiple sectors, such as interspecies relations, major trade routes, and defense coordination. This distribution of responsibilities prevented the overload that plagued centralized systems. Research on distributed governance models shows they outperform centralized systems in complex, diverse environments. Studies indicate that local decision-making produces better outcomes because officials understand regional conditions more intimately. The flexibility to experiment with different approaches allows successful innovations to spread, while unsuccessful ones remain contained. This creates continuous improvement through practical experience rather than theoretical planning. This structure prevented concentration of power through multiple overlapping safeguards. Term limits rotated leadership positions regularly across different species. Decision-making required consensus or supermajorities for significant actions. Independent auditing bodies monitored all government functions for fairness and efficiency. The system was designed so that no single species or faction could dominate others, as checks and balances were embedded throughout the governance structure. The anticipation built toward how this political freedom would affect cultural and technological development. With oppressive restrictions removed and diverse perspectives valued, creativity could flourish across previously suppressed civilizations. The exchange of ideas between sectors with different approaches and specialties promised accelerated innovation. This environment encouraged experimentation and cross-pollination of concepts that centralized systems would have discouraged. The resolution became evident as the galaxy entered a period of unprecedented advancement. The galaxy became more innovative because it became more free. Scientists from different species collaborated on research that combined unique biological insights with varied technological approaches. Artists created works that blended cultural traditions in entirely new forms. Engineers developed solutions that applied principles from multiple evolutionary backgrounds to common problems. This creative explosion demonstrated that true progress thrives in environments that encourage diversity and experimentation. This cultural and technological flowering naturally led to broader changes in how species interacted and collaborated. The increased innovation created new opportunities for economic and social development that further reinforced the stability of the governance model. Success bred more success as the benefits of cooperation became increasingly evident across all sectors of galactic society. Under imperial suppression, technological advancement followed narrow paths approved by the central authority. The Kitharan Empire dictated which research received funding and which innovations could be developed. This control created technological stagnation, as only projects supporting imperial goals received resources. Independent research was suppressed, alternative approaches were banned, and cross-species collaboration was prohibited. The galaxy's intellectual potential remained largely untapped because innovation served political control rather than general progress. Liberation unleashed an explosion of creativity across hundreds of species. Research facilities that had been restricted to military applications suddenly pursued diverse projects. Scientists free to follow their curiosity made discoveries that practical-minded imperial planners would have dismissed as useless. The removal of artificial constraints allowed natural innovation to flourish in directions no central authority could have predicted or directed. Specific breakthroughs demonstrated this creative explosion. Medical researchers combined biological knowledge from aquatic and terrestrial species to develop regenerative treatments that worked across physiologies. Energy specialists integrated gravitational manipulation with quantum field theory to create clean power sources. Materials scientists blended crystalline structures from desert worlds with metallic alloys from volcanic planets to produce substances with unprecedented properties. Each advancement came from combining previously separated knowledge systems. Studies of innovation consistently show that freedom accelerates technological progress. When researchers can pursue ideas without bureaucratic approval, they make unexpected discoveries. When multiple approaches to problem solving are encouraged rather than suppressed, Solutions emerge from unexpected directions. The historical pattern is clear. Open societies consistently outperform controlled ones in technological advancement because they harness the full spectrum of human creativity. Cross-cultural collaboration creates multiplicative effects rather than simple addition of capabilities. Different evolutionary backgrounds lead to unique perspectives on problem solving. A species that evolved in high radiation environments might approach shielding technology differently than one from protected worlds. Those variations in perspective, when combined, often produce solutions that neither group would develop independently. This diversity of thought becomes the engine of rapid advancement, the anticipation built toward what this collaborative environment could achieve. With hundreds of species sharing knowledge and thousands of research teams working on interconnected problems, progress began accelerating exponentially. Breakthroughs in one field enabled advances in others, creating a positive feedback loop of discovery. The galaxy entered a period of technological flowering that made the imperial era seem primitive by comparison. They discovered that the best way to advance quickly was to advance together. No single species possessed all the answers, but collectively they could solve problems that had seemed intractable. This cooperative approach yielded results far beyond what any centralized planning could have achieved. The free exchange of ideas across cultural boundaries became the catalyst for unprecedented progress. This acceleration naturally led to philosophical questions about the nature of progress itself. The technological achievements demonstrated that collaboration produced better results than competition, that diversity created stronger solutions than uniformity, and that freedom unlocked potential that control suppressed. These lessons would reshape how civilizations understood their place in the universe and their relationship with other species. The Catharan Empire measured strength in visible metrics: ship size, weapon yield, fleet numbers. Their entire concept of power revolved around destructive capacity and overwhelming force. They believed bigger always meant better. More firepower guaranteed victory, and technological superiority could never be challenged by inferior forces. This quantitative approach to power had served them for centuries against opponents who fought using similar principles. Humanity demonstrated that true strength lies in adaptability and creative problem-solving. Our advantage came from using limited resources in unexpected ways rather than matching the Empire's massive investments. We valued efficiency over raw power, precision over overwhelming force, and innovation over traditional approaches. This qualitative redefinition of strength proved more valuable than any technological advantage the Empire possessed. Specific qualities made the difference. Adaptability allowed us to respond to unexpected situations without predefined protocols. Creativity enabled solutions that bypassed conventional limitations. Cooperation multiplied our capabilities through distributed coordination. Resilience helped us withstand setbacks without losing strategic focus. These soft skills proved more decisive than hard technological advantages. Strategic studies identify multiple types of power beyond military capability. Structural power controls the rules of engagement. Network power comes from connections and relationships. Informational power derives from knowledge and intelligence. The Catharans focused exclusively on hard power while ignoring these other dimensions. This narrow focus created critical vulnerabilities in their strategic position. Traditional metrics failed because they measured inputs rather than outputs. The Empire counted ships but didn't assess how effectively they were used. They measured energy output but ignored application efficiency. They evaluated individual systems but missed network effects. Their assessment methods couldn't quantify creativity, adaptability, or cooperative potential, the very qualities that determined actual capability. This failure stemmed from their cultural bias toward visible dominance. They understood power as something to be displayed and measured directly. The concept of latent capability, strength that remains hidden until needed, didn't fit their worldview. They never developed methods to assess potential rather than current assets. The philosophical insight emerges from this contrast. The strongest force in the universe isn't destruction, it's creation. Building systems, forming connections, preserving knowledge, fostering cooperation. These creative acts generate lasting power that destruction can only temporarily suppress. The Empire's approach consumed resources to maintain dominance, while humanity's approach generated new resources through innovation. This understanding reshapes how we think about capability across civilizations. True strength comes from the ability to create solutions rather than destroy opponents. It emerges from adaptability to changing circumstances rather than rigidity in established patterns. It grows through cooperation rather than domination. These principles apply beyond military context to all forms of competition and progress. The transition to this new understanding occurred through practical demonstration rather than theoretical argument. The Empire experienced the superiority of creative power through undeniable results. Their massive fleets became useless against distributed networks. Their overwhelming firepower proved ineffective against precise targeting. Their technological advantage evaporated against integrated systems combining multiple approaches. This lesson extends beyond the immediate conflict to how civilizations approach challenges generally. The creative mindset that solved the military problem also addresses scientific, social, and environmental challenges. The same principles of adaptability, cooperation, and innovation that defeated the Empire can solve other complex problems facing galactic civilization. The resolution establishes a new paradigm for evaluating capability across species and civilizations. Instead of measuring military assets or technological development, we might assess creative potential, adaptive capacity, and collaborative ability. These qualities better predict long-term success than traditional power metrics. They represent the true nature of strength in a complex, interconnected galaxy. Before humanity's stand, galactic civilization operated under a culture of profound fear. Species kept to themselves, avoided contact with others, and accepted imperial domination as an unavoidable reality. The Kithran Empire had established psychological control through demonstrated overwhelming force, making resistance seem not just futile, but unimaginable. This environment created isolated civilizations that saw themselves as potential victims rather than potential partners. Humanity's successful resistance changed these perceptions fundamentally. Where species had previously viewed others with suspicion or saw them as competitors for imperial favor, they now recognized potential allies. The shift toward mutual respect developed naturally from the cooperative efforts that followed the conflict. Species that had been isolated began sharing knowledge and resources, discovering that their differences complemented rather than threatened each other. Interstellar relations transformed from hierarchical to horizontal structures. Communication channels that had been closed for centuries now carried cultural exchanges and scientific collaborations. Trade routes expanded beyond resource extraction to mutual development projects. Diplomacy replaced domination as the primary method of resolving disputes. These changes created a galactic community where species interacted as equals, rather than as conquerors and subjects. Psychological research shows that successful resistance against overwhelming odds creates empowerment across entire populations. When one group demonstrates that dominant powers can be challenged, it changes how others view their own capabilities. This effect ripples through cultural psychology, transforming feelings of helplessness into agency. The galactic shift reflected this pattern on an interstellar scale. The ripple effects extended beyond political relationships into cultural and scientific domains. Art forms began blending traditions from multiple species, creating new expressive forms. Scientific research accelerated through cross-species collaboration, with different evolutionary perspectives solving problems that had stalled under single-species approaches. Economic systems developed that valued sustainability over exploitation, recognizing that long-term prosperity required mutual benefit. This transformation built toward an enduring peace, grounded in practical cooperation rather than forced compliance. The peace lasted because it served everyone's interest rather than just the powerful. Species maintained their independence while benefiting from collective security and shared prosperity. The system contained built-in mechanisms for addressing grievances and adapting to changing circumstances. One species' refusal to bow taught the galaxy how to stand together. Humanity demonstrated that resistance need not mean isolation, that cooperation among diverse groups could achieve what individual species could not. This lesson reshaped how civilizations viewed their place in the galaxy, seeing themselves as part of a larger community with shared interests and mutual responsibilities. The change in perspective extended to how species viewed their own potential. Where they had once measured themselves against imperial standards of power and technology, they now valued creativity, adaptability, and cooperative ability. This shift in values created a more resilient galactic civilization that could face challenges through collective effort rather than centralized control. This legacy of resistance created a galaxy where fear no longer dictated relationships. Species could interact based on mutual interest and respect rather than power dynamics. The peace that emerged from this transformation proved more durable than any imposed through force, because it reflected the genuine desire of all parties to maintain positive relations. The transition to humanity's concluding thoughts emerges from this changed galactic landscape. The story demonstrates that apparent weakness can conceal unexpected strength, and that cooperation often proves more powerful than domination. These principles continue to guide interstellar relations, creating a future where diverse species advance together rather than competing for supremacy. The galaxy learned that true strength often conceals itself behind apparent vulnerability. Humanity's victory demonstrated that creativity and cooperation consistently overcome brute force through intelligent adaptation. We proved that careful preparation and diverse perspectives create advantages no amount of firepower can match. This story shows how humanity's best qualities, ingenuity, collaboration, and resilience, can shape a better future among the stars. If you enjoyed this exploration of human potential, subscribe for more stories about how our species might thrive in the cosmos. Our greatest adventures among the stars are yet to come.